We are diving straight into an absolute masterclass in structural defense. The text we're analyzing today positions Zeno of Elea not merely as a thinker, but literally as the master architect of negative dialectic. His entire treatise is engineered from the ground up to structurally fortify the ontological monism of Parmenides. And what's brilliant is that he accomplishes this not by building some fragile new theory, but through an unyielding, aggressive, deductive assault on his opponents. So let's explore exactly how this ancient manuscript weaponizes logic itself.
The primary textual objective here is absolute structural defense. Zeno of Elea isn't trying to explain how the stars move, and he's not positing a novel cosmology. Instead, he takes the pluralist's own premises, this idea that the universe is made of many moving parts, and he turns those very premises against them. By pushing their assumptions to their absolute breaking point, he forces their conceptual frameworks into irreconcilable contradictions. It's an inescapable philosophical trap.
This brings us directly to the core metaphysical conflict of the text. On one side, we have to en, the absolute, indivisible reality. On the other, we have to pola, the assertion of multiple divisible entities. Now, what is really fascinating here is how this philosophical gambit completely redefines ancient metaphysical discourse. The text transitions classical thought sharply away from speculative mythopoetics. It strips away the poetry, and it forces philosophy strictly into the exacting, unforgiving domain of formal logic.
Section 1. Elea, the crucible of Magna Graecia.
To truly grasp the intensity of this text, we have to situate it within Elea. This is the vibrant, highly volatile 5th century BCE geopolitical environment of Magna Graecia. You see, the aggressive analytical posture of this text didn't just emerge in a vacuum. It was forged here, standing entirely against the prevailing mainstream empiricism of the era. It was a time of immense cultural collision. We have Ionian empiricism, which relies entirely on sensory observation of a changing universe, clashing directly with Eleatic rationalism, which demands strict logical necessity for an ungenerated, indestructible reality. As alike trade networks rapidly expanded, they brought these diverse, colliding philosophical models together, and that desperately demanded a definitive logical methodology to adjudicate these massive claims about nature.
So, what was one of the primary targets of this text? The absolute dismantling of Pythagorean spatial assumptions. The Eleatic school utilized this uncompromising rationalism specifically to tear down Pythagorean assumptions regarding discrete spatial and numerical units. They absolutely refused to accept the premise that reality could just be chopped up into tiny discrete spatial blocks without facing fatal logical consequences.
To execute this teardown, the text relies on a highly specific structural narrative device, is autopon apagohi. This is the reduction to absurdity. It works like this. You posit an opponent's premise, and you relentlessly follow it until it derives a mathematically impossible conclusion. The prose style here is stark, it's cold, and it's unadorned. It is engineered for maximum dialectical lethality, deliberately eschewing any poetic ambiguity for sheer brutal logical transparency.
So how does this actually play out in the text? Enter the dilemma of magnitude. The text rigorously demonstrates that if multiple entities exist, they fall right into a massive logical trap. They must either be infinitely minute, meaning they possess absolute zero magnitude, or simultaneously they must be infinitely massive. By following the math, the text systematically proves that divisible bodies logically collapse into sizes of 0 and infinity all at once.
Let's analyze the textual mechanism of bulk and this resulting numerical paradox. Think about it. An entity completely devoid of magnitude simply cannot exist, because adding it to something else yields zero quantitative change. Yet, if it does have size, this finite plurality mathematically necessitates infinite density. Why? Well, because physical boundaries always require intervening objects to separate them ad infinitum. It's an endless regression of matter.
Section 2. Epistemological asceticism.
This brings us to a profound ethical concept embedded in the text. Epistemological asceticism. This is really about deep intellectual discipline. The text demands the categorical subjugation of deceptive sensory data to the absolute authority of rational deduction. Simply put, you can't trust your eyes, you must trust the logic. Within this stark ethical framework, accepting the reality of motion isn't merely a scientific error, it's framed as a moral failure. It sets up the debate as the vice of empirical gullibility versus the virtue of intellectual consistency. The text is literally critiquing the cognitive complacency of humanity. If your eyes tell you things are moving, but pure logic tells you motion is fundamentally contradictory, well, trusting your eyes is a catastrophic failure of reason.
As the text makes abundantly clear, truth is accessible only through rigorous logical validation, not through the chaotic,
contradictory reports of the eyes and ears. This enforces an incredible philosophical discipline upon the reader. It demands that you purposefully, actively abandon your deeply ingrained spatial intuition in favor of the indivisible, unchanging nature of logical truth.
Section 3. Dialectical progression, the paradoxes of motion.
First up is the famous dichotomia. We need to meticulously trace the relentless sequential logic happening here. To reach a destination, you must first traverse to the exact halfway point. Okay, then you traverse halfway across the remaining distance. Then halfway again, and again. It's an infinite mechanical regression. You're constantly moving, but mathematically you can never actually arrive. By visualizing this, we see exactly how the infinite halfway points compound mechanically to render the traversal of any distance logically impossible.
Advancing the internal logic, we hit the Achilles paradox. Here, kinetic pursuit mathematically proves that the swiftest runner can never actually intersect the slowest runner. The reason is entirely structural. The pursuer must constantly reach the ever-advancing previous locus of the pursuit. Every single time Achilles reaches exactly where the tortoise was, the tortoise has already moved a tiny fraction further ahead.
From here, we witness absolute temporal and mechanical failure. First, look at the flying arrow. If Chronos consists of indivisible instants, the arrow occupies a space equal to itself at every single frozen instant, meaning it remains totally static. Now compare that to the stadium paradox. Here, opposing bodies moving at equal speeds erroneously prove that half a duration actually equals its double. This recurring motif of irreconcilable continuous magnitude forces the very mechanics of motion into a state of total systemic failure.
Section 4, Transmission, Aristoteles and the Feasts.
So, you might be wondering, how do we even possess these rigorous arguments today? Ironically, we relied heavily on the historical preservation of the text through the critical refutations mounted by Aristoteles. He preserved these paradoxes precisely to destroy them in his profound scientific treatise, the Physica. It is a brilliant twist of literary transmission that the survival of these incredibly destructive arguments comes from the exact scholar trying to resolve them. To dismantle this logic, Aristoteles generated a crucial analytical distinction within the concept of the apheiron. He distinguished between something being infinite by division, which is traversable because time itself exhibits that same infinite divisibility, versus something being infinite in respect of extremities or boundaries.
Furthermore, Aristoteles dismantled the flying arrow paradox by explicitly asserting the continuous nature of time. He directly rejected the Eleatic premise of indivisible temporal fragments. By arguing that an instant is not a part of time in the rigid way they assumed, he structurally undermined the assertion that an object is entirely at rest in the present moment.
Yet, despite those refutations, the enduring legacy of this secular classical literature is absolutely staggering. From its formulation in Elea in the 5th century BCE, right through its critical preservation by Aristotle, it became an indestructible dialectical architecture that fundamentally altered analytical philosophy forever. It literally laid the rigorous foundational groundwork that modern minds still grapple with today in calculus and quantum mechanics.
Which leaves us with a profound, lingering tension. Can human perception ever truly reconcile with the uncompromising, infinite limits of mathematical reality? When we look out at the world, our eyes tell us we see a smooth, continuous flow of motion, yet the deductive continuum of the universe pushes back with paradoxes that challenge the very nature of existence. It forces a final, absolutely fascinating question. When reality fractures, do we trust our senses or do we follow the math?